At the family cabin, I found hidden cameras in my daughter's room. I packed us up instantly and drove straight home without saying a word. When I discovered who put them there and why, I never looked at my brother-in-law the same way again. The plan was supposed to be perfect. A long weekend at the Pinecrest family cabin nestled in the mountains of Oregon. Just me, my 8-year-old daughter Lily, and what I thought would be some much-needed peace and quiet away from our hectic life in Portland. My husband David was traveling for work again, another conference in Chicago that would keep him away for 5 days, so it was going to be our little mother-daughter adventure. I'm Rachel, by the way, 30 years old, working as a graphic designer for a small marketing firm, trying to balance career ambitions with motherhood in that way that never quite feels balanced no matter how hard you try. David and I had been married for 9 years, together for 12, and we'd built what I thought was a pretty solid life together. Good jobs, nice house in the suburbs, healthy daughter who was smart as a whip and twice as stubborn. The cabin had been in David's family for over 20 years. His parents, Robert and Linda Hartwell, had bought it as a weekend retreat when David and his younger brother Kyle were still in high school. It was this gorgeous log structure with a wraparound porch sitting on 15 acres of pristine forest land about 2 hours east of Portland. The kind of place that looked like it belonged on a postcard, complete with a babbling creek running through the property and mountain views that took your breath away. Over the years, it had become our family's gathering place. Christmas mornings, summer barbecues, long weekends when city life felt too overwhelming. Lily had taken her first steps on that wooden porch. She'd caught her first fish in Willow Creek that ran behind the cabin. The place was woven into the fabric of our family story. Kyle, David's brother, had always been a big part of that story too. He was 26, 4 years younger than David, and everything my husband wasn't. Where David was methodical and cautious, Kyle was impulsive and charming. Where David preferred quiet evenings at home, Kyle was always planning the next adventure. He worked as a freelance photographer, which meant his schedule was flexible enough that he often ended up at the cabin when the rest of us were there. Lily absolutely adored her Uncle Kyle. He was the fun adult who let her stay up past bedtime, who taught her card tricks, who always had the best stories about his photography assignments. He'd travel all over the Pacific Northwest for work, wedding shoots, nature photography, commercial projects, and he'd come back with tales that made our suburban life seem incredibly boring by comparison. "Uncle Kyle is so cool," Lily would say after every visit. "He's been everywhere." I'd always been grateful for Kyle's presence in Lily's life. Growing up, I'd been an only child with distant parents who showed love through achievement rather than affection. Having Kyle around meant Lily got to experience the kind of fun, spontaneous uncle relationship I'd never had. It felt like a gift. The cabin itself was set up perfectly for family gatherings. The main floor had a large living room with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the mountains, a kitchen with a massive farmhouse table that could seat 10 people, and a master bedroom where David and I always stayed. Upstairs was a cozy loft that had been converted into 2 smaller bedrooms, one that Kyle claimed as his own, and another smaller one that had become Lily's room over the years. That little dormer room was Lily's absolute favorite place in the world. It was tucked under the eaves with a slanted ceiling and a dormer window that looked out over the forest. David's mom, Linda, had decorated it specifically with Lily in mind. Soft lavender walls, white furniture that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale, and shelves lined with books and stuffed animals that had accumulated over years of visits. There was something magical about that room from a child's perspective. The way the afternoon sunlight streamed through the dormer window and cast dancing shadows on the walls, the cozy reading nook built into the window seat with soft cushions and a view of the treetops, the vintage picture frames Linda had hung on the walls filled with old family photos that told the story of decades of cabin memories. Lily had declared it her room when she was barely 3 years old, marching up the narrow stairs with all the confidence of a tiny queen claiming her castle. "This is my room now," she'd announced to anyone within earshot. And somehow it had stuck. Even when other family members visited with their own children, everyone understood that the little dormer room belonged to Lily. The plan for this particular weekend had been beautifully simple. David would fly out Thursday morning for his conference, and Lily and I would drive up to the cabin Friday after school. We'd spend Friday night and all day Saturday there, just the 2 of us, and drive back Sunday afternoon in time for Lily's soccer practice Monday morning. I'd been looking forward to this trip for weeks.
Work had been incredibly stressful lately. We were in the middle of a major rebranding project for one of our biggest clients, and I'd been putting in 60-hour weeks trying to get everything perfect. David had been traveling more than usual, which meant I'd been handling most of the parenting duties solo. Between school pickups, soccer practice, grocery shopping, homework help, and trying to maintain some semblance of a social life, I felt like I was barely keeping my head above water.
The cabin represented a reset button, a chance to slow down, breathe deeply, and remember what mattered most. Lily and I would hike the familiar trails, read books by the fireplace, maybe try our hand at fishing in the creek. We'd cook simple meals, play board games, and talk about everything and nothing in that way that only happens when you're away from the distractions of regular life. I'd packed carefully for our little getaway. Comfortable clothes for hiking, books for both of us, Lily's art supplies in case she wanted to draw, ingredients for her favorite pancakes Saturday morning. I'd even brought along the new camera I'd been wanting to try out. Nothing fancy, just a digital SLR I'd bought online that I hoped would help me capture some beautiful moments with my daughter. The drive up to the cabin Friday evening had been perfect. Traffic was light, the weather was clear, and Lily was in one of her chatty moods, telling me all about her week at school. She was in 3rd grade now, and every day seemed to bring new dramas and discoveries that she'd share with breathless enthusiasm. "Mom, did you know that Mrs. Peterson's cat has 6 toes on each front paw? That's called polydactyly. I looked it up in the library." "Mom, Jake Torres said girls can't be astronauts, but I told him about Sally Ride, and he didn't know what to say." "Mom, I think I want to learn to play guitar. Uncle Kyle said he'd teach me some chords next time he visits." Everything about the evening felt right. The familiar route through winding mountain roads, the smell of pine trees growing stronger as we climbed in elevation, the excitement in Lily's voice as we got closer to our destination. When we finally pulled into the gravel driveway and saw the cabin waiting for us, windows glowing warmly in the dusk, it felt like coming home. We'd arrived just as the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that no photograph could ever capture. Lily had jumped out of the car before I had even turned off the engine, running toward the porch with her overnight bag bouncing behind her. "I'm going straight to my room," she called back to me. "I want to see if everything is still the same." I'd laughed, watching her disappear through the front door with all the confidence of someone who belonged there completely. That sense of belonging was something I'd always loved about bringing Lily to the cabin. In our regular life in Portland, she was just one of many kids in a big school, in a busy neighborhood, in a world that often felt too fast and too loud. But at the cabin, she was special. She was the little girl who knew every hiking trail, who could identify different bird calls, who had her own room waiting for her in a place that felt touched by magic. After unloading our bags and getting settled, we'd spent Friday evening exactly as I'd hoped we would. We made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup for dinner, played 3 rounds of Go Fish by the fireplace, and read together in the big armchair that faced the windows overlooking the forest. Lily had fallen asleep in my arms around 9 o'clock, and I'd carried her upstairs to her room, tucking her into the twin bed under the eaves and kissing her forehead goodnight. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as it should be. Saturday morning had dawned bright and clear, with that crisp mountain air that makes you want to take deeper breaths than usual. Lily had bounced into the kitchen around 7, already dressed and ready for adventure. "Can we make pancakes? Can we go hiking? Can we look for the family of deer we saw last time? Can we try to catch fish for lunch?" Her enthusiasm was infectious, and we'd spent the morning checking items off her ambitious to-do list. Blueberry pancakes for breakfast, check. Short hike down to the creek, check. Unsuccessful but entertaining attempt at fishing, check. By afternoon, we were both pleasantly tired and had settled into the living room for some quiet time. Lily with her coloring books, me with a novel I'd been trying to finish for months. It was around 3 o'clock when Lily announced she wanted to take a nap in her room. This wasn't unusual. The mountain air and morning activities often wore her out, and afternoon naps were a common part of our cabin routine. "I'm going to read in my bed for a while," she said,
gathering up her current favorite book and her stuffed rabbit. "Will you wake me up in time for hot chocolate?" "Of course, sweetheart. I'll come check on you in an hour." She'd padded upstairs in her sock feet, and I'd heard the familiar sounds of her settling into her room, the creak of the old floorboards, the soft thud of her book hitting the bedside table, the rustle of covers being arranged just so. I'd gone back to my novel, enjoying the peaceful quiet of the cabin in the afternoon. The only sounds were the whisper of wind through the pine trees outside and the distant murmur of the creek. This was exactly what I'd needed. The sense of stillness, of being completely present in a moment instead of constantly rushing toward the next thing.
About 45 minutes later, I'd decided to go upstairs and peek in on Lily, not to wake her if she was sleeping, just to check that she was comfortable and maybe adjust her blankets if needed. It was the kind of small, nurturing gesture that felt natural in the quiet intimacy of our weekend together. The stairs to the second floor were narrow and steep, built in an era when people were apparently smaller and more agile than modern families. I'd climbed them thousands of times over the years, knowing exactly which steps creaked and how to distribute my weight to move as quietly as possible. Lily's door was slightly ajar, which was normal. She'd never liked having it completely closed, preferring to be able to hear the sounds of the house around her even while she slept. I'd pushed it open gently and stepped inside, expecting to see her curled up with her book and stuffed rabbit, maybe dozing in that peaceful way children do when they feel completely safe. Instead, she was sitting up in bed, very still, staring at the wall across from her with an expression I'd never seen before. Not scared exactly, but alert, confused. Like she was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't quite make sense. "Lily? Everything okay, sweetie?" She'd turned to look at me, and I could see she was trying to decide whether to say something. That careful weighing of words that happens when kids aren't sure if what they're thinking is important enough to share with adults. "Mom," she said slowly, "what's that black thing behind Grammy Linda's picture?" I followed her gaze to the wall she'd been staring at. There, hanging in its usual spot, was a vintage silver frame containing a black and white photograph of Linda as a young woman. It was one of several family photos that decorated Lily's room, the kind of personal touches that made the space feel loved and lived in. But as I looked more closely, I could see what Lily was talking about. Behind the frame, barely visible unless you were looking at just the right angle, was something small and dark. Something that didn't belong. "I don't know, honey. Let me take a look." I crossed the small room in 3 steps and gently lifted the picture frame from its hook on the wall, and that's when my world tilted sideways. It wasn't just behind one frame. As I looked more carefully, checking the other pictures that hung on Lily's walls, I found them everywhere. Tiny black objects, no bigger than a button, carefully positioned behind frames and hidden in corners where they'd be almost impossible to notice unless you were specifically looking for them. Professional surveillance cameras, multiple angles, recording equipment that was clearly expensive and sophisticated. Someone had been watching my daughter sleep. In that moment, standing in what I thought was the safest place in the world for my child, holding evidence of a violation so complete and horrifying that my brain couldn't quite process it, everything changed. The room that had always felt magical suddenly felt sinister. The cozy corners that had seemed perfect for a little girl now felt like hiding places for predators. The sense of safety and belonging that had drawn us to this place for years crumbled into something dark and dangerous. My hands were shaking as I continued my search, finding camera after camera hidden throughout the room. Behind the mirror on the antique dresser, tucked into the corner where the slanted ceiling met the wall, even one positioned to capture the bed from multiple angles. This wasn't random. This wasn't some break-in or stranger danger situation. This was planned, professional, methodical. Someone with access to this cabin, someone who knew our family's routines and habits, had installed a comprehensive surveillance system in my daughter's bedroom.
Someone who knew that Lily considered this her special room, her safe space, her home away from home. Someone who knew that we'd be here this weekend, that she'd be sleeping in this bed, that she'd be changing clothes and playing and existing in the most vulnerable way children do when they believe they're protected. Mom, Lily's voice was small now, picking up on the change in my energy even though she couldn't understand what was happening. What's those things? Why do you look scared? I tried to keep my voice steady, tried not to let my horror show on my face. They're not supposed to be here, sweetie. We need to leave. Right now. Leave? But we just got here. We haven't even had hot chocolate yet. I know, baby, I know, but we need to go home. Can you help me pack up our things really quickly? The next 20 minutes were a blur of controlled panic. I swept through the cabin, gathering our belongings with shaking hands while trying to maintain some semblance of calm for Lily's sake. Every shadow seemed threatening now. Every creak of the old wooden floors made me jump. The place that had always felt like a sanctuary now felt like a trap. I didn't call David, I didn't call the police, I didn't call anyone. Some instinct told me that I needed to get us out of there first, get to safety, get to a place where I could think clearly before I figured out what to do next.
Let me back up and tell you about the family I thought I married into, because understanding that makes what happened so much worse. When I first met David 8 years ago at a coffee shop in downtown Portland, he seemed like everything I'd been looking for. Stable, kind, from what appeared to be a close-knit family that actually liked spending time together. Coming from my own dysfunctional background, absent father, mother who showed affection through criticism, David's family felt like winning the lottery. The Hartwells were the kind of family you see in commercials. Robert, David's dad, was a retired high school principal with kind eyes and endless patience for his grandchildren. Linda, his mom, was a former nurse who channeled all her caregiving instincts into making everyone around her feel loved and fed. They'd been married 35 years and still held hands during family dinners. And then there was Kyle. From the moment I met David's younger brother, I understood why everyone adored him. Kyle had this magnetic personality that drew people in effortlessly. He was the guy who remembered everyone's birthday, who showed up with thoughtful gifts for no reason, who could make a room full of strangers feel like old friends within minutes. At 22, when I first met him, Kyle was everything David wasn't. Where David was cautious and methodical in his career as an accountant, Kyle was creative and spontaneous with his photography business. Where David preferred quiet evenings at home, Kyle was always planning the next adventure. Camping trips, road trips, photography expeditions to capture the perfect sunset. Kyle's the artist of the family, Linda would say, with obvious pride. Always has been, ever since he was little. Remember Robert? He used to carry that little camera everywhere, taking pictures of everything. The family dynamic was fascinating to watch. Robert and Linda clearly loved both their sons, but there was something special about their relationship with Kyle. Maybe it was because he was the baby, or maybe it was because his creative spirit reminded them of dreams they'd once had. Whatever it was, Kyle could do no wrong in their eyes. David never seemed bitter about this favoritism. If anything, he seemed proud of his younger brother's success and charm. Kyle's always been the special one, he'd tell me with genuine affection. He's got this gift for making people happy. I'm just glad he's part of our family. When Lily was born, Kyle immediately stepped into the uncle role like he'd been training for it his whole life. He was there for her first Christmas, taking hundreds of photos and insisting we make a special album just for her. He showed up for her first steps with a video camera, determined to capture every milestone. By the time she could walk, she was following him around like a devoted puppy. "Uncle Kyle is the best," became Lily's constant refrain. And honestly, I agreed with her. Kyle was the uncle who remembered what it was like to be a kid. He'd get down on the floor and play with Lily's toys for hours, genuinely engaged in whatever imaginary world she'd created. He taught her card tricks and magic tricks that left her eyes wide open with wonder. He'd bring her small gifts from his photography trips, interesting rocks, pressed flowers, postcards from beautiful places she'd never seen.
Most importantly, Kyle seemed to genuinely enjoy Lily's company in a way that felt rare among adults. He didn't talk down to her or dismiss her ideas. He listened when she told him about her day at school, asked thoughtful questions about her drawings, and treated her opinions like they mattered. "Kyle gets me," Lily would say when she was around 6 years old, and I'd feel grateful that she had an adult in her life who made her feel understood and valued. The cabin weekends became our family tradition partly because of Kyle's presence there. He'd drive up from his apartment in Portland whenever we were planning a visit, turning what might have been quiet family time into something more dynamic and fun. He'd organize scavenger hunts for Lily, teach her to skip stones in the creek, and tell her stories around the campfire that were just scary enough to be thrilling without giving her nightmares. David and I would sit on the porch with coffee, watching Kyle and Lily explore the property together. And I think about how lucky we were to have him as part of our family unit. Lily was getting to experience the kind of fun, engaged uncle relationship that I'd never had growing up. "She adores him," I'd tell David, watching Lily laugh at something Kyle had said. "He's good with kids. Always has been. Remember how he was with our cousin's kids at the reunion? He just has this natural ability to connect with them." Looking back now, I can see that there might have been signs I missed. Or maybe I'm just torturing myself by re-examining every interaction through the lens of what I now know. Like the way Kyle always seemed to know exactly when we were planning cabin trips, even before we'd finalized our plans. "I was thinking of heading up to the cabin this weekend," he'd say casually, and we'd realize we'd been planning the same thing. It felt like family synchronicity at the time. Or the way he always insisted on helping Lily get settled in her room when we arrived at the cabin. "Let Uncle Kyle help you unpack," he'd say, carrying her bag upstairs while David and I dealt with groceries and getting the heat turned on. I thought it was sweet that he wanted to make sure she felt comfortable. Or the photography equipment he always brought with him. Professional cameras, extra lenses, tripods, lighting equipment that seemed excessive for family snapshots. "I like to document our family memories," he'd explain when I'd tease him about looking like a professional photo shoot. "These moments are important."
He was always taking pictures of Lily, candid shots of her reading, playing, exploring the woods around the cabin. "She's such a natural subject," he'd say, showing me artistic black and white photos that made my daughter look like something from a magazine spread. "She's not self-conscious like most kids. She just exists authentically." I'd been flattered by his attention to capturing Lily's childhood. In our busy daily life, I sometimes felt like I was too rushed to properly document all the small moments that made up her growing up. Having Kyle there with his photographer's eye, making sure we had beautiful images of these family times, felt like a gift. Now, I wonder what else he was documenting, what other images he was capturing when we weren't aware, when Lily wasn't posing, when she thought she was in her private, safe space. The worst part is that Kyle made himself indispensable to our family life in ways that went beyond the cabin trips. He was the one we called when we needed someone to watch Lily for an evening out. He was the one who showed up with soup when she was sick. He was the one who remembered her school plays and soccer games, often bringing his camera to capture her performances. "You're so lucky to have Kyle," other parents would tell me at Lily's school events, watching him cheer her on from the sidelines. "It's wonderful when kids have family members who are so involved and supportive." I'd agreed with them wholeheartedly. Having Kyle as part of Lily's life felt like winning the extended family lottery. He provided something that David and I, with our busy work schedules and limited extended family, couldn't give her ourselves. That sense of having multiple adults who care deeply about her well-being and happiness. Kyle never missed an opportunity to reinforce how special Lily was to him. "She's like the daughter I never had," he'd tell people, which always made my heart warm. "I can't imagine my life without that little girl in it." He'd talk about how he looked forward to watching her grow up, to being part of her major life milestones, to always being someone she could count on. "I want to be the uncle she can come to when she's older and needs someone to talk to, someone who's not her parents but who loves her unconditionally." It all sounded so healthy and loving, the kind of family support system every child deserves.
But now, sitting in my bedroom, staring at the evidence of what he'd really been doing, I realized I'd been completely naive about his motivations. Those beautiful photos of Lily weren't artistic documentation of her childhood, they were something much darker. His enthusiasm for being part of her life wasn't uncle-like devotion. It was something that makes me sick to think about. And the cabin that had felt like our family's safe haven, the place where Lily felt most herself and most protected, had been turned into a stage for whatever twisted purposes Kyle had in mind. The man I'd trusted completely with my daughter's well-being had been violating that trust in the most horrific way possible. And I'd been so grateful for his presence in our lives that I'd never questioned his motives, never looked deeper than his charming surface, never considered someone who seemed so loving and trustworthy could be hiding something so sinister. This was the family I thought I knew. These were the people I trusted with the most precious thing in my world. And now everything, every memory, every moment, every assumption I'd made about their character and our relationships had to be re-examined through the lens of this horrible discovery. The question that haunted me most was how long had this been going on? And what else didn't I know about the man I'd welcomed so completely into my daughter's life? Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.